Right, good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to councillors and staff in the chamber. Also to any members of the public who are watching the live stream. Welcome to this council meeting here today. We'll get straight into it. It's not a, there's a number of items obviously in the agenda. We've also got Dr. Ian Griffin coming from the Otago Museum, going to be speaking to us. That's at 10:30, so it's not an agenda item, but it's just a presentation from him, which we will do in as part of the meeting. Right, so first of all, do we have any apologies? None. Okay, moving on to any declarations of interest. And there's no one here for public forum, but we'll be treating Dr. Ian Griffin's presentation as part of that. So moving on to my report for the last 6 weeks, or whatever it's been since the last one. I'll take it as read, other than just a bit of an update, I suppose, with the on the Three Waters reform. We had the Minister come and speak to us at the Zone 5 and 6 meeting last Thursday and Friday, and we've had confirmation that we, as a district, we do have the choice of whether we might be part of entity. What are we up to? Entity I or entity J, I think we're up to. So 9 and 10, either being Canterbury and West Coast or Otago and Southland. So we'll be having a further discussion on that and the different implications pretty shortly. The reforms overall, the change to the Three Water reform has, probably made it slightly better for us as far as having a voice within the entity, but it'll be one voice in 16 or one voice in 26, depending on which entity we might be with, which is just marginally more than having what we were going to have with the previous reform model. So there is that, but it does affect the efficiency of and the potential cost saving as we go forward and get on with the various upgrades and other work that we need to do. I won't go into all of the other detail, but quite happy to take any questions or comments. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you for the report, and it's very comprehensive, and your analysis of the Three Waters changes and the positions of both parties is thorough, thoughtful and helpful. You did mention that we would be discussing we're going to ask the Minister to let us make the decision. I've got my fingers crossed about that, and I'm very optimistic. But you said we'll be discussing our preference soon. Is that going to be at a public forum, or how's that going to happen?
Well, we'll have an initial discussion this afternoon to actually decide how we might do that. One of the uncertainties is just how much time we have and whether we can properly engage with the public. But I think we need to have a discussion about what information do we still need to actually make that decision, and talk to officers about that and make sure that we've got everything that we can possibly have, to make that final decision on which way do we go, which one's going to benefit our community most is really what it comes down to. Anything, Councillor Holding?
Thank you. I just will we in that discussion get a chance to discuss what it means for the loss of the tranche to better off funding?
Yes, that will be part of the annual plan discussions generally, I think. But we need to understand what the implications are. The government is still a little bit coy about what might happen. Essentially, tranche 2 was a total of $1.5 billion to be shared across all of the councils, depending on their size and so forth. So for us, that was a bit over $11 million. The government has and DIA have indicated there could be some additional no worse off funding. So that could be an extra $500 million that we could get back through there, but that funding, I believe, comes after the reform has happened essentially. So it's rather than a progress payment, it's something that comes later. So we need to get the details on that and make sure we're as informed as we can be, and can explain the situation to our community. Anything else? Okay, someone like to move the receive the information? Councillor Cowles, thank you. Councillor Thompson. All those in favour say aye. And against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, moving on to recommendations from the Performance Audit Risk Committee from the meeting held on the 28th of March. We've got Mr. Simon Neal with us. So, Simon, do you have any comments to make on as an introductory comment?
No, nothing specific from me. The main thing is really
Just press it up. Yeah,
sorry.
It's coming on.
No, the main thing for me really is around the procurement performance metrics that I'd like to see established, and then I think there's also a recommendation in here for the changes to be approved today.
Okay, and Mr. Hope, particularly with looking at the procurement policy for when we get that's the you made some additional comments on that. So is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that was really just adding in some additional detail into the policy to reflect the discussions that took place in the committee meeting. Really just clarifying, particularly around when some business cases, it was sort of unclear whether a business case was required in some places, and that has been clarified to say that it is. I think otherwise it's really just an update of the previous policy. So yeah, we'd like to see it go through.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Councillor Hopkins?
Well, it's a question about a question, really. I've been asked to ask about interest rates, and I'm wondering if I should ask that question now or when we come to the financial summary later in the meeting, Paul.
I think it would be better to ask those in the financial update.
Okay. Right, so we've got the Treasury strategy recommendation there, 5.11. So someone happy to move? Deputy Mayor Halilele and Councillor Hopkins seconded that. Any further discussion? I'll put it, those in favour say aye.
Aye.
And against? That's carried. And then the recommendation on the next page around the procurement policy. So any further questions or discussion on that one? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have one question on page 43 of our agenda, and it's page 21 of the new procurement document. At the very top of that page, it says, where Waka Kotahi co-investment forms part of the project, prior approval from Waka Kotahi would be required. They usually sit with us on big matters as part of the tendering committee. I'm trying to work out whether this is particular to them or whether this is something they've imposed on us or we've voluntarily offered. Is this something that's applies to other government funders or agencies? What's the logic and rationale of this, please?
So that is a requirement of Waka Kotahi, basically as part of co-investment program, but it is all essentially agreed up front as really part of the 3-year plan about how procurement will be undertaken. So it's really allowing us to accommodate a requirement as part of the co-investment agreement.
So a supplementary question, and just for clarification, basically once every 3 years we sort out with Waka Kotahi, we agree a set of ground rules about how we're going to do things. So it's not a case by case, every instance matter.
It's essentially that there's almost previously they had a standalone procurement policy that was agreed between council and Waka Kotahi, and now it's really being integrated into a wider procurement approach.
Thank you. Councillor Kells.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I guess it's probably just as a bit of education process for myself. I just noticed reading through here and looking at the procurement cycle, and when we get to the end, we have the contract expiry and the asset disposal. Do we have a separate policy around how we dispose of goods and what the expectations are there?
Yes, we certainly do. And it varies really by the asset class that we're disposing of. I think probably vehicles is the most high profile one, where it's very, very clear about the process we should undertake. Generally, we use most things until they have absolutely no worth anymore. We do really run things into the ground. IT is another space where if there's some value, then we'll get them scrubbed and disposed of in that way. But generally, we have enough demand to circulate screens and other things like that. So, and bigger assets, yeah, then we'd sort of do those on a case by case basis. But yeah, there is a separate policy.
Okay, any other questions? Would someone like to move the recommendation there? Councillor Kells, thank you, and Deputy Mayor Haley. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll put it. Those in favour, please say aye. And those against. It's carried. Thank you. All right, moving through to the adoption of the updated strategic framework on page 48. So this is obviously something we've been working on for quite some time since the election, just to be very clear about what our priorities are as a governance team, and obviously with some input from the exec leadership team as to what's achievable and you know what the high level things are that we should be doing. So all of you will be familiar with this. The community might not be quite so familiar. I think it's probably something that's worth communicating to them more specifically on, just so that you know they're clear around where our priorities are to actually deliver both at a council level and community level the services that we're doing. Happy for any questions if there's any. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, well, look, I've got one. It on page 53 and again on 55, we say as a strategic priority that we should establish an economic development agency. Now, this strategic framework was discussed for the annual plan and before the consultation on the dissolution of Tourism Waitaki and the establishment of the agency. I'm just wondering, if we adopted it now, could we be accused of predetermination? I would have thought perhaps at this stage the priority should be to implement the economic development strategy, because we're asking people whether they want us to set up the agency. So I'm just, is there a bit of a potential conflict there between consultation and engagement and predetermination?
Yeah, I think obviously we have adopted the strategy and as part of the strategy. So I totally understand where you're coming from, though, in that we have yet to make any formal decision on establishing an EDA. There's a consultation going on at the moment, and that may affect what we end up doing. And so if there was agreement around this table, we could change it to implement the strategy, but the strategy says set up an EDA. So it's I think we're better to get through that process and then determine actually, even at this early stage, do we want to change our priorities because they have been changed through the consultation process, or actually we've agreed with that is the next step, and that we carry on and do that. So it's a very early test when we're sitting, worked for 6 months, set the priorities, or agreed on priorities, adopting them now, but we've got a consultation process happening. So yeah, this is probably where I asked Mr. Palmerley for any feedback that he might want to give.
I'm not sure I've got much further to add on that. Yeah, the council has adopted the strategy and you adopted a resolution to consult on setting up an EDA. I think if you come to a conclusion following the consultation that you're not going to establish an EDA, then you review your priorities. Priorities are there to guide us, but they shouldn't be set in stone. We need to be we need to try and stick to our priorities, but if circumstances change that mean that we need to change those priorities, then we should do that as a council.
Very well put. Right. Any other questions? Someone like to move that we adopt? Okay, Councillor Holding. Thank you, Councillor Linwood. Any further discussion? Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, very briefly, it's just strictly and absolutely a matter of style. On that first page, or again on page 53, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verbs: establish, strengthen, deliver, finish, and facilitate. And then for some funny reason, 2 present participles: developing and attracting. And I think as a matter of style, it should be develop our people and attract skills. It's a very small change, but it would be still stylistically and grammatically consistent.
No one would ever want to us to be described as being inconsistent on style. So I think we do need to change those ones. So happy to accept that unless there's any objection. No. So slight modification to be done on those. Thank you. Right. Anything else? We'll put it the strategic priority framework is adopted. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And those against, that is carried. Right, whistling through it. So next we've got Bank Authority and signatories updates. So just reflecting some staff changes, and hand over to Mr. Hope to talk about this particular item.
So I'll keep this relatively brief. So yes, we have appointed a new Chief Financial Officer, Amanda Nichols, who starts today. So it's really the first time we've had a change in a senior finance role for some time, which caused us to look at making sure that she has the necessary authority to operate council's bank accounts, which is pretty critical to the roles. And really what it did highlight that they are probably a little out of date and antiquated. So suggesting in the second recommendation that we actually undertake a full review of the operating authorities to make sure that it's fit for purpose and fit for the future. So it's a reasonably mechanical procedural item, but I think it has triggered a little bit of extra work, and we'll bring that recommendation back to you as soon as we possibly can. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Thompson? No.
I was actually going to move the motion, Your Honour, but look, just a very quick question. I'm sorry, but it did strike me that the review isn't necessary. That you could, as of now, simply decommission some people and commission others, because your paragraphs say that essentially the banking environment's changed so much that all the people who needed to be able to sign things don't anymore. If we are going to do a complete review, how long will it take, and how thorough does it really need to be?
I would have thought at most it would be a 6-week exercise, like 6 weeks away to get the report to council. It's really just doing a bit of work, getting a wee bit of advice, given Ms. Nichols' background. So she has previously worked for Audit New Zealand, so has a view across a number of other councils and really what's appropriate. And then sort of discussions with the executive team in particular about who actually wants to have authority and versus who should. So yeah, it'll be a relatively quick process.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got the recommendations there, and moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Deputy Mayor Halalele. Any further discussion? Should put it. Those in favour, please say aye. And those against, and that's carried. Right, we've got Merriman Airfield as the next agenda item, but Clive Geddes is going to be turning up for that, and that's not planned until basically an hour and a half away. So we'll got the financial summary and overview. We'll see whether Mr. Geddes is in town or close to town and might be able to be here a bit earlier, but otherwise there might be a bit of a gap between proceedings because you've all been so efficient getting through the agenda so far. So Mr. Hope, the financial summary and overview. So this would normally come to the Performance Audit and Risk Committee, but there weren't any other agenda items worth having that meeting for. So that meeting has been cancelled for this month, and this financial report's come to us instead. But Mr. Hope, you can introduce us, and then we've got Mr. Neil, the chair of the Park Committee, who could speak to it as well.
Yeah, so this is the reasonably quick sort of update on the position at the end of the month. And really just using this to highlight sort of, we have three very large items that are impacting council's financial position, particularly the projected position to the end of the financial year. By far the most significant of those was a budget allowance for significant revenue to be received by council in relation to the Sports and Event Centre. However, the timing of that project means that revenue will not be, council is not now expecting to receive it, so it will really change the position from a reasonably significant surplus to a significant deficit. Again, that's not something that elected members or the community should be concerned about. It's really just a mismatch of, we have to receive the funding as revenue and recognise it that way, but all the expenditure is capital, so it creates should show a surplus for the year. It's again, a couple of other items are the increased amount of depreciation that we're facing, and that's a matter that we're discussing through the annual plan process in terms of how we cope with that. And then you'll finally receive confirmation that we will be receiving funding for the emergency works in relation to the flooding that took place in July, but that the effect of that is still flowing through. So otherwise, there are a reasonable number of up and downs, but the general net position, I think, is really relatively overall close to budget. So very happy to answer any questions. And with some of them, if there's more detail required, we'll reflect that in the next quarterly update that goes to the Performance Audit and Risk Committee, where we do provide a lot more detail and try and answer any further questions with significant detail to really inform the committee and the wider public.
Thank you. And Mr. Neil, do you have anything you want to highlight or comment on?
No, I think Mr. Hope's covered off most things. The only addition I've got is that I'm really pleased that we've got a new CFO joining, and look forward to working with them on some of the more strategic metrics that we're looking at going forward, especially around using Bancorp services, etc.
Yeah, that's it's just very pleasing to see that position filled, and hopefully, well, I'm sure it will add value to what we're able to do and what we can see as far as making sure that the accounts are as transparent as possible to us and to the community. And I just highlight that issue around what our budgets are and what we end up with as deficits or surpluses. I mean, we have to budget on what we think might happen, and when funding such as that coming from the external fundraising for the event centre, when we budget for it to come in at a particular time and then it doesn't, then suddenly we're automatically that many millions of dollars in deficit. that'll balance up if, you know, if and when it does come in that we haven't budgeted for it then, and it'll show us a surplus of that much. But it can be a bit confusing to us and to the community, and yeah, it's not always evident why have we got a deficit, or why have we got a surplus that's much greater than what we were expecting. Just the way we do our budgeting, unfortunately. So moving to the report itself, do councillors got any questions? Councillor Holding.
Thank you. Just on page 72, capital expenditure, bullet point 2, of the carryover projects that haven't been completed. Is it intended that those carryovers will be used for the same sort of projects? There's not a prior resolution that's affected that.
It certainly will be. So that will, is standard practice, a report that we will bring through to council to confirm the need and desire to carry on with the projects that really haven't started in any substantial way. Any project that is well underway, we sort of pretty much automatically carry forward the funding for that, so it can be completed. It certainly will be a discussion that will come back to this table.
Yeah, and we definitely need to have a session before that, and just informing us what hasn't been carried out, what do we have money for, what was going to be loan funded, is it something that if the reforms proceed, you know, that we still want to get on and do. So that's definitely a discussion we need to have. There's a lot going on, obviously, in the water space, and you know, this, I think the Western upgrade is has just started. The Kakanui one is going to be starting shortly, and projects like that which we're getting on with, and then yeah, just looking at some of those longer term ones. Do we still want to do it, or do we just want to do the planning stage rather than the actual implementation, etc.? So we will have that discussion. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I have a couple with your permission, Mayor Kircher. First one is I was asked if I could, or could I find out with regard to the refinancing that we undertook through LGFA on the 15th and 17th of April, with $9 million of refinancing. What was the interest rate for that, Paul? Are you able to tell us, please?
Yeah, and yeah, thanks for sort of asking that question. So I've got a wee bit of warning. Yeah, the $7 million was refinanced at 5.7%, and $2 million was at a floating rate at 6.18.
Thank you. Now, my next question, whether it's to you or to Alex or even to all of us, there's a pattern emerging, it seems to me. If you look at page 73 under capital expenditure, we're $12 million underspent for the period, and this underspend is everywhere: roading, waters, property, parks, rec, information services. Surely, don't we have to actually acknowledge this now with our budgets and stop having the great big laundry list we do have, especially when consistently and repeatedly we're not getting the work we say we want to do done in the timeframes?
Yeah, and that's why, particularly, you know, mentioned Three Waters as being one of those things where we need to review and maybe make some other decisions, just because of the shortage of contractors and so forth. So we do need to be serious about that. Mr. Parnley, will make further comments on what we do and how we do it.
And I think this isn't new news, and I think, you know, we discussed this back in, what was it, November 21, when we talked about, you know, we're trying to do too much and we'll achieve more by trying to do less. And we started that process. So you recall going through the draft annual plan that we went through, and, you know, took out a lot of things because, you know, we have to be realistic about what we can deliver. And I think every council's facing this challenge. All my colleagues I speak to are under delivering at the moment, and that's a combination of not having the resources to deliver, procurement taking longer, finding it harder to get contractors. And so we are trying to cut our cloth accordingly in the annual plan process, and we'll need to look at that when we get into the LTP as well, if indeed we do do an LTP. And there was some talk last week about not doing LTPs or delaying them, and we'll need to discuss the merits of that. But we have started that process, but we're not at the end of that process. And I think it's between management and governance. We need to be having a good hard look at everything we're doing and saying, is it realistic? Are we going to get to that, or are we actually overstretching? I think in terms of relating that to what we're borrowing, we're not borrowing to fulfill that program. We're borrowing funds when we need it. So we're not we haven't got stashes of borrowed money there sitting waiting to deliver. We borrow when we need to borrow the funds, and that relates to the rate of delivery rather than the ambition of the program.
Just on the LTP, so the discussions last week at the South Island Council's meeting really revolved around should we be having a long-term plan when the future is so uncertain about a quarter or a third of most councils' business, which is the water activity, and what are we best to do because of the weather events, Cyclone Gabrielle and the North Island. A lot of those very affected councils have it's been indicated that they will do a long-term plan process, but it will actually be a medium-term plan, and that they will need to do the next 3 years, but they won't be expected to do 10 years. And so that was picked up on because of at the zone meeting that some of the same challenges affect all of us around the water and how that affects budgets. And maybe it would be better for all of us to actually focus on what the next 3 years might be and do it that way. I do have a question from Dan Gordon, who's the chair of Zone 5, sorry, the rest of the South Island. It's not Zone 6, which is Otago Southland. Dan Gordon has asked for feedback on the idea of actually not doing a long-term plan at all, or even a medium-term plan, but actually just do the next 2 years as annual plans. And really, we would need to know how much faith do we have in year 4 of our current long-term plan, or actually is it so far out now that we're better off to just redo that year at least as a full-on planning session rather than just a modification, which an annual plan would normally be currently. So something for us to think about, and we need to at least get our view across, and probably just ask officers to look at how accurate is year 4 and year 5 looking, or actually are we better to try and do something that is more of a 3-year plan, which that process pretty much has already started, I think, as far as long-term plan goes. So while we're still doing the annual plan for this current year, we're working on the long-term plan for the year after, or the 10 years after. So yes, so it's very much a moving feast at the moment. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, just one very small one, Paul. On the next page, 73, there is a reference to our budgeted operating procedure for the annual plan, and I do come back to the matter I raised before. We're projecting 64,362,000 and showing the same in the plan. I really do question whether it's time to actually get more rigorous about that and pull it back even more than we have already, because the systemic issue does seem to be getting worse, not better. And very quickly on that same page, there's a reference to the loss of revenue of 9.2 million for the Sports and Events Centre, but it says with no matching reduction in operating costs. And I'm just curious to know what operating costs we're talking about.
Sorry, that's going back to the issue I raised earlier that usually if you see a drop in revenue with most organisations, you'd expect to see a drop in operating costs because you've scaled back your operation with the loss of revenue. But because of it's essentially third-party funding, there isn't that kind of change.
So it's not cost specific to the centre, no.
So just to put that in English, essentially we're not getting that revenue in from the fundraising, but equally we weren't planning on starting the work during this year. And so if we were planning on starting it and spending that money in the same year, you would see a corresponding drop in the operating side of things. But it was basically to accumulate that and then start the project was in I think the following year. So that's yeah, if it was all coming in and being spent the same year, it would balance out, but it wasn't planned to do that. Anything else? Someone like to move what are we doing? Receiving and noting the information. Councillor Linwood, thank you. And Councillor Holding, thank you. Those in favour say aye. And those against? That's carried. Right, I'm not sure if we've been able to get in touch with Mr. Geddes, so we haven't, so we're going to have a break for a while. If he's travelling still, it will be he won't be coming in until 10:50, but we will have Dr. Ian Griffin here at 10:30, so either way we should be able to be back by 10:30. If we can be back earlier, we will, and that'll shorten the gap.
What's coming in at 10?
Oh, okay, right. So both are actually expected at 10 o'clock. They're going to join us for morning tea, but yeah, we'll look at having a break now and reconvening at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much. Okay, if you could just go to item 6.3, page 60. We'll just go on here. Okay, so welcome back, everybody, as we reconvene this council meeting. So slight juggle in timetable. We're going to item 6.3 on page 60. So the council controlled organisation, Marama Airfield Limited. Pleased to have Clive Geddes, the chair of the Marama Airfield board, with us in the chamber. So welcome, Clive, and look forward to hearing from you, and no doubt there'll be a few questions for you as well. So just hand it straight over to you, and yeah, just push the button on the right on the microphone to activate that, and away we go.
Good morning, Your Worship, councillors, executive. The easiest thing will be to start with the 6-monthly report to December 31st, 2022, which is we are now well past. So I can probably add a little more to it. We've been working really hard over the last 3 years, as you are aware of, to manage the airfield as carefully as we can by keeping an emphasis on maintaining the progress that's been made with it over the past 10 years and not getting involved in any new projects. So the 6-monthly report to December 2022 reflects that, and that it's very much a steady state expenditure. The pleasing thing about it is that our revenues are at or about budget, and I can advise you that that has continued in the past 4 months. So for January, February, March, we had unexpected good weather. We were predicting that the La Nina effect would last and we would have a lot of easterly and northeasterly weather, which is not good for soaring. That did not happen, and the soaring activity through January, February and half of March was way above budget. So we are looking to the end of the year to have an annual result that will be significantly ahead of budget for revenue, and we have continued to hold expenditure. So happy to take any answers, Your Worship, on the information in the 6-month report. Any questions? Sorry.
Thank you. Councillors. Councillor Holding.
Just as an observation, for revenue here, that seems like a very top-heavy audit and accountancy fees.
Sorry?
The accountancy and audit seems pretty top-heavy. Is there a way to trim that back there?
If you guys would sell 2% of your shares, would be okay. It's a requirement of the Local Government Act that as a CCO, we are audited. That means that we have to engage accountants over and above the level that you would normally do for a company of this size. And the combined costs of that this year are going to be close to $18,000. There is no easy way around it. I think we did have, Your Worship, a discussion 2 or 3 years ago around that, and we've decided that the council shareholding is important to the council and the community, and we've just got to do our best as a board to manage the cost of audit and accounting.
So the reference that Clive made to the 2% is if we have less than 50%, then it's no longer a CCO. And yeah, if we're not appointing half the directors and having half the shareholding. So that's yeah, at the moment that's the cost of a CCO, which is it is ridiculous as far as the requirements for such a small turnover. Something worth discussing a bit more in future again. So any other questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I do have a couple. Clive, thank you for this. And the questions are focusing on some of the problematic numbers, more because I'm concerned that the implication for the airfield, it's not a criticism, but I'm just curious to know why general expenses have gone up from 500 to 1400. Equally, how come this very significant drop in terminal expenses? And then if you look at this is at the bottom of page 63 of our agenda, your total operating expenses have jumped by $10,000, meaning that what was a $4,000 profit is now a $6,000 loss, at least in that 6 months. So I'm just worried about, or asking really, for clarification as to the particular explanations, but also does that significant switch in total operating expenses concern you?
No, because it's legible. So you'll note that the accountancy cost is close to $2,500 over budget. And that was because we are in a position of engaging a bookkeeper and an accountant, because an accountant alone, the best quote that we got for services to the airfield was a little over $20,000. And we have been able to trim that back by employing a bookkeeper at a much lower hourly rate, who supplies the base information to the accountant. So that's part of it. The other part, the terminal, two things have happened. R&M has dropped, and the terminal expenses have changed because we changed the maintenance and cleaning contractor, and we rewrote their brief so that the terminal in the peak season is not cleaned every day. It's cleaned and serviced every third day, and that's made a big difference to the cost. And we did that on a provisional basis, and if there had been complaints about its condition, our contract allowed us to reinstate more regular cleaning, but that hasn't been necessary. I can't tell you offhand, Councillor, why the general expenses at $1,500 or $1,000 over budget, but I can find out for you.
Look, I seriously would just counsel councillors to, look at meaningful differences. A difference of $1,000 over a 6-month period, and in such a small budget overall, I don't think is very material, and I wouldn't want to be wasting Clive's time on trying to find out what's behind $1,000. We need to make sure we're spending our time meaningfully, and we're not using up too much of Clive's time when he's, as chair, is doing the work for nothing, and we need to value that, the fact that he is providing a lot of expertise, by being there and not being remunerated at all. So I just ask, let's focus on the more meaningful things. Councillor Cowles and then Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. I'd just like to congratulate you guys on maintaining where you have. It's a great detailed report. If we look at the future of what you guys are doing around the property and that sort of stuff, I think it looks pretty bright. I know that it's been a challenging time. Obviously, we're coming out of a bit of an unknown with a pandemic and those sorts of things, but it's certainly a great asset for the region. Being up the Ahuriri end, it's, we see lots of activity around it. I know that whilst it's not just the airport itself, it generates a lot of revenue to our area with people staying and living and spending around our region. So I just want to congratulate you on being so prudent in such a tough time.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to the directors.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify a couple of comments that Councillor Hopkins had made too around the $4,000 profit, etc. The $4,000 profit was for the same period the previous year.
Yeah.
And so in fact, what they've managed to do is that even though there's been a significant increase in audit costs, you've reduced the loss from what was forecast to be 11 to 6.
Thank you. Just a quick question from me, Clive. Just around debtors and prepayments, it's up reasonably significantly, as I'm sure there's a good reason for that, but is there any concern?
A timing factor.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the cutoff was end of December,
Right.
left with a whole lot of money to come.
Right. Oh, that's all very good. Any other questions? Okay, someone like to move or receive the report? Councillor McCone, thank you. Councillor Cowell, second that. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, Clive, for coming in, and yeah, just really appreciate that you do make a real effort to be here and to answer all the questions. And yeah, as Councillor Cowell said, just acknowledge the good work that the board is doing, and it's really appreciated. It's an important asset too, particularly that part of our district. And
Thank you.
Yeah, keep up the good work.
We're very optimistic about the year to come. In the for 3 reasons. In the past 2 months, both the American Gliding Club and Kahu Soaring, who are the sole commercial operator on the airfield, have both announced expansion plans. A simple example, Kahu Soaring are going from 1 permanent pilot and 1 standby pilot to 4 permanent pilots on the basis of the bookings that they are currently holding for the coming soaring season. The American Gliding Club has taken on board for the soaring season 23-24 a paid manager so that they can become more efficient in their use of equipment, and they are looking at adding another 2-seater to the fleet. And the third thing is that the company is making steady progress with its subdivision, and we would hope for 24-25 to be in a position where the company has access to somewhere between $55,000 and $75,000 per annum of investment income, which changes the whole way that the company can work and what it can do with those funds. A, to catch up on maintenance, but B, to support activity that will increase activity on the airfield. So we're very optimistic about the immediate year to come and the year after that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I did neglect to ask what's on the horizon. So yeah, no, it's very good news, and I think I know you're putting in extra work at the moment to make some of those things happen. So thank you for that. Did councillors any further questions on those activities? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Clive.
Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to have another short break, probably just for around about 10 or 12 minutes. We've got some new staff that we're getting introduced to over morning tea, and because of the change of time, so they're just coming along there now. So we'll have that break, and we should be reconvening about 10:30. Apologies again to anyone watching live stream for the disruptions. Just got a weird sound issue at the moment, so we're just going to get that sorted out. So yeah, we've had to juggle various things around just to try and make sure that we get things done as efficiently as possible. So thanks for bearing with us. We're very pleased to have Dr. Ian Griffin from the Otago Museum with us in the chamber, and also Chloe Searle, our own director of our Waitaki Museum. So welcome to you both. Ian, you've got a presentation. Is it going to be online, visible?
Yes.
Okay, so technology issues have been solved. So we'll go to that presentation and welcome in. And just when you're ready to go, just press the microphone button on the right hand side. Yeah, and
Kia ora. No ingarangi, ko Thames Te Awa, ko Heriwaka Te Maunga, ko Ian Griffin Aho. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm the director of the Otago Museum, and in this presentation I will try and explain some of the things that we do for Waitaki and talk about the funding challenges that we have, and then would invite questions about the presentation. Just to give you some context, our museum was founded in 1868 and celebrated its 150th birthday a few years back. Now, we're one of the 4 major metropolitan museums in New Zealand, and we have an act of parliament that defines how our institution should be funded. And under that act, we receive levy funding from Dunedin City Council, Central Otago District Council, Luther District Council, and of course Waitaki, which is why I'm here today. We have a large collection involving 1.5 million objects, ranging in size from whales to insects, incredible cultural materials from across the planet, cuneiform tablets from the Middle East. We've got amazing treasures from iwi across the country as well. We are a major tourist attraction. Pre-COVID, bringing in between 350 and 400,000 visitors per year. And I'll speak a little bit to the economic impact of our institution later in this presentation. We are an educational experience provider, and many schools and families come down, especially during the holidays, which we've just had, and they visit the Science Centre, the Butterfly House, and of course the 9 galleries, and spend time learning about their culture. We do get levy funding, and we really appreciate the amount of public investment that we get, but for reasons I'll go into later, that in levy funding doesn't cover the cost of operating the museum. So we have to generate a significant fraction of our necessary operating budget through commercial activities and by fundraising. I would note that we are one of the top performing museums in Australasia when it comes to self-generating income. So what did we do specifically for the Waitaki district in 2022? Well, last year, COVID was still impacting us. The number of tourists was back, but we had nearly 270,000 visitors. And our most recent survey says that 3% of the visitors come from Waitaki. So on a bare bones basis, that means about 8,000 Waitaki residents visited the museum last year. We also run an education team that comes out to schools in Waitaki, and the schools themselves come to visit us at the museum as well. And more than 1,700 students have taken advantage of that since 2020. And in the last couple of years, the museum was successful in getting grant funding to fund 2 projects, Tūtonu and Hidden Hazards, forgive me, which allowed us to go and work with museums across Otago, including some here in Waitaki, the Forrester Gallery and the Oamaru Rain and Steam, and also the Waitaki Museum, all took advantage of the opportunities that these programs offered. Under the present levy funding scheme, Waitaki District Council fund the museum to the tune of about $60,000 last year. Now, just before COVID, we commissioned Martin Jenkins to carry out an economic and social impact survey for the museum because we were getting a little tired with folks saying that the museum was a cost to the district. And we felt that someone independent should really take a look hard at, you know, the actual economic impact of an institution like ours. And we didn't, it was a completely hands-off process. We said to Martin Jenkins, go away, use the tools that you would use, for example, for the Forsyth Bar Stadium or another typical thing like that, and see what number comes back. And somewhat surprisingly, you might think that that particular piece of work where Martin Jenkins said that our institution contributes more than $25 million a year to the regional economy, that's the whole of Otago. For every dollar of funding that we get from public funding, there's a return of $5.90. So that's a significant return. And I think it does speak to the actual value of cultural institutions. Very often people say that they're nice to have rather than necessary, but actually they do offer significant economic impact for the local economy. And also if you factor in the social impacts, the number of school children that are inspired to take an interest in science, technology, engineering and maths, some of those will go on to professional careers. So museums are part of the economic engine that power any region. So in terms of our museum, this slide just illustrates the challenges that we face. You can see that of the 4 metro museums, we get by far the least funding, despite having a collection of a similar size. And the only way we really can keep going is through a real focus on our commercial activity, generating income to offset the running costs of the museum. And you'll see in this chart, which is for 2019-2020, 49% of our funding came from local government, whereas the other 3 major institutions had significantly larger proportion coming from local government. And because they had larger ratepayer bases, they got significantly more money as well. So one of the problems over the last couple of years has been COVID. We have been disproportionately impacted by the impact of COVID because we need visitor income to help offset the running costs of the museum. So the fall off in visitor numbers really did impact our ability to do some of the things we wanted to do. So while we are still doing our best, post-COVID, our business model has been severely hit by slow recovery in tourism, combined with the impact of rising costs, with inflation running near on 7% at the moment. So one of the reasons we come back and make presentations to each of our councils is we try and show the things that we're doing for you. And we also try and say, look, actually, the pressures on us at the moment are extreme. The levy funding for our institution has not kept pace with inflation. I've been director now 10 years. And over that 10-year period, our funding has never kept pace with inflation. And it's significantly impacted our ability to kind of do the basics. So this year we're going to each of our councils. I've been to Central already, and they've agreed to give us a 7% increase. I'm here today asking for something similar from you. And I will be going next week to Dunedin City Council to ask for a similar increase as well. Another point I would make is we recognise that we are a burden on the ratepayers, despite all of the things I've said about the economic impact. And we are actively saying that the collection that we have is so important, it should be recognised by government, and there should be some kind of government funding to support some of the core functions that we do. So, for example, absolutely running school classes for local schools, you could say, is a local function. We have scientists coming in from across New Zealand, DNA sampling our collection, and our staff have to service that requirement. I would argue that that's a nationally important task that should get national funding. So one of the reasons I wanted to come and speak to you today was to try and seek your support when we go to central government to get that funding somehow. And I want to finish by saying we do appreciate the levy funding that we get from each of the councils. We hope you see good value in terms of the investment that you make in us, and just reflect that we do not only expect people to come to the museum, but we do a significant amount of outreach, particularly at the moment, science engagement outreach. And our teams have been in Waitaki a lot in the last few weeks and months. So thank you very much. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Griffin. Yeah, it's always an interesting relationship we have, because you say you come asking for money, but essentially we don't have much choice, because it's an act of parliament that we do have to provide the proportion of funding that we do. And you know, and I think in your discussion, I think you recognise that sometimes that comes with a wee bit of tension, particularly as we're trying to invest in our own museum and our own facilities, and provide as much as possible. So, I think we need to acknowledge that. We do appreciate you coming here and speaking to us. I've got a few questions, but I'm only going to ask one to start with, and that is just around the Martin Jenkins study. It talks about Otago, but did they break it down into districts? Because a lot of the economic benefit that comes from the museum is very focused on Dunedin, and quite rightly they pay the lion's share. But there's no extrapolation out to what does it actually look like for each of the districts that contributes. What's the are we getting our $5.90 back or whatever it is for each dollar of the $62,000 we're spending this year that we're paying to the museum? So we'll start with that. We clearly won't.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair question. To be honest, we asked them to do the report for a particular amount of money, and to do it at a finer granularity would have been even more expensive. And we just didn't think at that stage that it was worth breaking it down. But I think it's a very fair question. And I would say, though, that in terms of the tourism impact, people do come to visit the museums in every city. And if you have a museum that's big enough to attract a major audience, there will be some flow-on effect. Although I can't qualitatively or quantitatively tell you what that would be.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, following up from the Mayor, Ian, and thank you very much for the variety of reports we've had. I, like the Mayor, I have a number of questions, and I'll ask them one at a time or as the Mayor decrees. But the Martin Jenkins report identifies 18.3 million of the 25 as going into Dunedin. So the amount of money supposedly generated for the rest of Otago, on that basis, would be about $7 million, spread between 4 councils, Central Otago, QLDC, who appear to be making a contribution, even though they don't appear to be statutorily obliged to do so, Clutha, and ourselves. So $7 million divided by 4 is about, a bit over $1 million. If you just spread it evenly, it's only about $1 million each, isn't it?
Yes. Excuse me. I think you're correct, but I'm not an economist, and I'm not someone who could go into the detail on that. But I think that's a reasonable first assumption. Yes.
May I ask? May I ask some other questions?
I'm just trying to find the reference that you're making there.
It's on the Martin Jenkins report. Let me just find it here. Hold on. Page 10 of the Martin Jenkins report, which is the third of the 3 documents we were provided with.
Okay. Sorry, I'll just read through that. But yeah, go ahead and ask.
Yeah, but look, are we statutorily obliged to accept the increase? You mentioned that other councils have agreed to do it. A second supplementary question to that, or related question, there's a reference in one of these reports to the fact that Clutha isn't paying as they should do according to the formula. What's the cost impact of that, and what are you doing to actually get them in line with everyone else?
Well, under the Act of Parliament, let me address the second point first. Under the Act, anything that Clutha don't pay has to be picked up by DCC. So, because the Act defines a way of a formula for calculating the levy, and there was an agreement that was in place, I think, until around 2010. I think it was before my time as director, certainly. But after that particular time, Clutha decided that they didn't like the agreement anymore. And unfortunately, the 4 councils have not been able to come to a separate agreement in the last, well, at least for the last 10 years. So we have this situation ongoing where we have to treat different councils differently. To address your first question, no, you don't. That's one of the reasons we come to speak to you. So you don't actually have to, under the Acts, give us an increase. You can't reduce us, but you actually could decide today that actually we don't want to do it.
If I just give a wee bit of background to the Act, it was an Act of Parliament. We said the region's got to contribute. Queenstown Lakes doesn't. It was determined, I believe, that at that time the Arrowtown Museum was their effort at providing the same service, and that they shouldn't have to pay into a museum in Dunedin. So they got a free ride, and then the other councils worked out on proximity to the Dunedin Museum, and we're population based. So our main population, being in Oamaru, is about twice as far away as what Clutha's is. Their population base in Belclutha and Milton and so on. So it was determined that essentially Clutha pays over 3 times as much as what Waitaki does. Clutha didn't like that, and we said, you are paying too much, but they said, no, you aren't paying enough. So there's a wee bit of disagreement on that, because equally we feel our museum, actually we have great aspirations for that. So that meant that we've got the situation where we've got, for a while we did have some agreement that actually Queenstown would voluntarily make a contribution, and that should offset some of Clutha's. That would seem to be the better option. But it only works as long as Queenstown agrees that they should or could make a contribution. There's been some attempts to try and modify it along the way, bearing in mind that there is legislation sitting behind it. But that's just the challenge that we've got. It's what we've inherited, and it doesn't take into account the current day situation around what we're putting into our museum, or what Clutha's putting into theirs, or what Queenstown Lakes puts into Arrowtown. So just part of the challenge that we've got to work with on this one. I'm not sure, Chloe, whether you've got any other thoughts on that particular aspect of it.
Not so much on the sort of funding split thing. It's a very complex situation, but I think really just my perspective would be we would be supportive of Otago Museum's quest for national funding, and certainly for the metropolitan museums, but even acknowledging what happens with our own smaller regional museums as well. It's an interesting situation where we all care for collections that ultimately sum up, collections of national significance in one way or another, and how we find a funding mechanism that acknowledges that through central government, I think, is a challenge for all museum directors. And we do greatly value the support as a museum collegially we get from Otago Museum. They've been very helpful, especially with conservation work as we got upstairs open. So just wanted to acknowledge that, especially from Nissa, who's now left Otago Museum, but was fantastic to work with.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, absolutely, there should be recognition of those regionally significant museums, and the government should be contributing. I know Ashburton did get more support than they would have otherwise when they built their new facility, because they had a army uniform from someone from the Maori battalion, which was a bit of a rarity and something that was nationally significant. So there's different measures that the government looks at on these things, and actually, if we're largely providing a similar job, what funding should actually come, instead of just pouring it into Papa and then bits and pieces going into others through grants and so on. Councillor McCone, you've got a question there.
Guys, just thoughts on the thing. So, could you talk us through the wages, please? I said in 2016 it was square, and now you're about 900k over where your funding line is. And secondly, I've seen your annual plan on page 5 or second page, where you're drafting your plan. Your predicting that you'll need an 8% increase for 2024 and then 3% per annum after that. Is that for funding? Where's that funding needed and why is it needed?
Second question first, we basically want to get an inflation level increase every year. And I think in the plan, there was a debate in the plan whether it's 7% or 8% at the time. So there's a small mistake there. In terms of the salaries, one of the consequences of going after grant funding. So one of the ways we fund some of the stuff we do is we go and get, for example, the Tutonu grant program, which sent people out here, is we actually have to hire extra people to run those programs. So one of the reasons salaries increased is the amount of things like science engagement that we're doing has gone up. And that's funded within the grant programs, but the core number of staff hasn't increased. So we haven't suddenly exploded in terms of staff numbers. What that reflects is the amount of activity that's going on funded by grants.
Yes, Hopkins, you had one or two more.
Yeah, two, if I may. First of them, picking up on Councillor McCone's question, your annual report also shows that you're budgeting, I think, for this year, 22-23, a $1.5 million deficit, much the same the year after that. And I think for 24-25, 1.9 deficit. I'm just wondering if that's actually sustainable. I mean, should you be budgeting for that level of loss and increase over that period of time?
When we build our budgets, we assume certain capital things are going to go forward and we defer those. So basically what we're doing is building up a set of deferred problems for the museum. We've been doing that for a number of years because, to be honest, we've never really been funded for depreciation. So in that regard, while we may well say, I think the 1.9 million is something to do with one of the roofs in one of the buildings. Absolutely, we want to do that roof, but if we don't have the funding, we won't spend the money. So therefore, what has tended to happen every year, we run a deficit. Sorry, we can fund about $400,000 a year through depreciation if we run as we have done for the last 5 or 6 years. In practice, we fund all of our capital developments by fundraising. So I mean, I take your point. The budget at some level doesn't necessarily reflect what it will be, but it's got to reflect our aspirations. And the challenge we'll have is to kind of find the capital funding to fulfill those deficits, and therefore there won't be deficits. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. My last question, forgive me if it sounds a bit confrontational, it isn't intended. The reports indicate that only one engagement there's a reference here to the museum staff helping our museum staff setting up their new exhibition space. Everything else I've seen in here, visiting AMP shows, not ours, taking touring exhibitions, none of them appear to be referencing us. The space one goes to Queenstown, then to Ashburton, and then up to Christchurch. Do you think you're engaging enough with, and you've said today, there's more engagement than that. So are you engaging enough with us? Do you think we're getting our fair share of some of these extra, travelling shows and the like that are mentioned in quite considerable detail here?
I think that's a very fair question. For $60,000, I know for a fact over the last couple of years, a significant amount of our conservators' time has been invested up here. And the conservator salaries are of the order of $80,000 a year. On top of that, some of the activities that we do at the museum, I do think have some kind of spin-off locally. So, for example, Monday night there was a massive aurora, and I'm pretty sure there were quite a few local residents out tracking the Southern Lights. And that's a program that very much our institution championed 5, 6, 7 years ago, and now it's starting to kind of have an impact to the extent where loads of, and I don't know if there's plans to have a dark sky reserve in the Waitaki Valley, but there should be, because that attracts tourism. So I think if I were to go back to the museum and do a set of accounts, I could probably demonstrate that we spend at least $60,000 in this particular area. I would like to think it's a lot more than that, but I haven't actually got those numbers with me.
And if I may just say something for the touring exhibition side of it, we haven't been in a position with the museum redevelopment to even be looking at accepting any of those from Otago. So I'm hoping that will be a conversation we can pick up, but we still have a relatively small touring exhibition space at the museum. So some of the things may have to wait until the proposed gallery redevelopment to fully be able to take advantage of some of those great shows that Otago develop.
That does raise a question to you, Chloe. Why use the museum? If these are touring exhibitions and one of them, the space one, went to iFly, indoor flying space, totally third party in Queenstown, why aren't we looking at possibly staging these events, empty shops in the main street, possibly the ink box? I mean, why aren't we being a bit creative in terms of actually accommodating these exhibitions?
I think we absolutely can be, and I'd really just put that down to a staff resourcing thing over the last couple of years where we were carrying a couple of vacancies at the museum, and I was at one stage wearing 3 hats. Bringing in touring exhibitions to external facilities wasn't the focus, but as we work through those, that's definitely a conversation that myself and the Otago Museum team would love to have, because they are good things to be able to bring to Waitaki, and it is one way of getting benefit for our residents from that levy.
I had also a question on the different areas that you've gone to, and the fact that Queenstown did get the science, space science one, and iFly, and you went to Ashburton with it after that. Are they part of the fundraising, or is it just part of outreach?
Well, that specific exhibition, Tuhurangi, is New Zealand in Space, and we got the contract to develop that exhibition. And the idea is it was going to tour around the country to as many centres as we would go to. And to be honest, the reason it didn't come here is because possibly we didn't have a conversation with Chloe and say, actually, have you got somewhere we can put this? We're not actively trying to avoid Waitaki, I can assure you, and we value the relationship. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you potentially could put something like that exhibition into a different space, but that may not be strategically what the museum wants to do. So that's not my job to kind of say one way or the other. But absolutely, we've got touring exhibitions, and they have been to Central Otago, to Central Stories and other places. And we're very happy to kind of share those, because it's a benefit for everybody to see them.
Thank you very much for that. Just got time for a couple more questions if we got them, Councillor McCone.
Sorry, I'll be greedy and that's 2 more at once.
And then we've got Councillor Harley there too.
With the advent of COVID disappearing and everything else, do you estimate your foot traffic to go up? I see you've mentioned the cruise ships and everything else. Are you expecting more, because New Zealanders are now moving around, that they'll come through, which will help your bottom line? And secondly, you're talking about a property on McLagan Street. Where are the funds for that earmarked if that building sells?
Firstly, apocryphally, the numbers are going up. The last few weeks at our museum has been much better attendance, and I feel that while we're still not over the hump, we're getting close to the top of it, which is great. In terms of the money for McLagan Street, let me give you context for that. Our museum did a master planning exercise about 3 years ago, and if you come to our museum, you will see that the storage facilities are appalling. Some of the areas of storage don't have sprinklers, for example. So the number one priority that came out of that master planning exercise is we have to get a really good state-of-the-art off-site store. And we have some reserves that we could use to do that. Now, we had an existing off-site store, which was not fit for purpose. So that is in the process of being sold to partly fund the new one. And we're in discussions because there's a regional need for safe off-site storage. It's not just our museum that needs this. There are other museums in Dunedin and elsewhere. So we're working potentially with partners to build a regional storage facility that can look after Tauka and collections from various partners, including the University of Otago. And that's a really critical project for us. It's the way we can absolutely guarantee that the collection is going to be safe for the longest period of time. So it's a key project, and that's a big focus for us at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reports that you've provided us. Just inquiring about your outreach process to our local schools and community providers. I know a few years ago that you had brought the Lebanon box to our Talanoa Akua program. Are there opportunities for more of that in the future, but also tailoring it to a high school age group? So there's a bit of diversity around, like the displays and things that you're providing.
I know we've had a couple of really good outreach events here, certainly in the last couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years. And yes, actively we do want to support that. There are sometimes through funding opportunities. So our museum's just been successful to get a grant. It's called Smoke Free New Zealand, and the idea is it's an exhibition that kind of tries to persuade kids not to smoke or to vape, and that's something that we're really interested in doing outreach, particularly to this area and Clutha, and that's something that we've got funding for, and we will be looking for partners. So if you've got, maybe after the meeting, if we want to email me with some suggestions, we'd love to talk to you about it.
Yes, sure, and also supportive of you advocating for national funding from central government ministries. I think the key would be to know how to access according to all the various all of government strategies.
Yeah, there's certainly between Dunedin and Oamaru, there's significant Pacifica population. So Tana knows some of the inroads to Ministry for Pacific People that might be quite helpful as far as that goes. But yeah, it's been a big part of our history, the Pacifica population overall, and there's. So, I mean, it's something that we're trying to tell more of our stories, and that's the migrant stories and all of those things, which are really beneficial to be inclusive of our whole population now. So, yeah, if there's opportunities, we're definitely happy to support those to get further external funding, both into our museum and Otago Museum. So, councillors, there's nothing else. We'll draw this to a close, but thank you very much, Dr. Griffin, for coming along, and thank you, Chloe, for coming in as well. It's a big challenge getting funding, and we're just going through an annual plan process where we've had to cut roughly about $3 million from our budgets, and not all those cuts are popular. It's fair to say. So we're trying to look at every avenue for how do we make sure we're spending our money most efficiently, and if there is further funding that could go into looking at actually what's the each district's benefit from the museum, that would be very helpful to know. But appreciate all the work that your team has done helping our museum and the outreach programs that have come to our people. It's all important and very helpful for us. So thank you.
Just a question. I'm wondering, this has been recorded, it's public. Would it be appropriate to consider a resolution that we support the museum's application for additional central government funding?
It's not appropriate to do that without it being an agenda item. So essentially, that is something that perhaps could, if it needs to, come back. But I'm sure none of us are opposed to that support. So as far as that goes. So with that, thanks very much, everyone, and we'll draw this meeting to a close. So thank you, everyone who's been on the live stream. Again, sorry for the disruption along the way, but appreciate that you're hanging in there. So with that, we'll declare the meeting closed.